Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have an organic object. Leland Melvin is an American engineer and retired NASA astronaut who served on board the Space Shuttle Atlantis as a mission specialist. He is an incredibly brilliant man with an incredible resume, and that is exactly why this story is so unnerving. He claimed that, while on a space mission as he was orbiting Earth, which, for the record, how cool would it be able to tell a story that happened while you were orbiting Earth? It would be the only story I told for the rest of my life. But anyway, while he was on this mission, he said he saw a, quote, alien-like organic object. NASA disputed his claims and said that what he saw was just ice, but I feel like I trust the person who actually saw it with their own eyes. Leland went on to write that whatever he saw was, quote, translucent, curved, organic looking. I have no explanations to offer, but I will say it certainly is interesting and kind of terrifying. In our number 9 spot today, we have DNA difference. Scott Kelly is an engineer, a naval aviator, and a former NASA astronaut, and for his interesting discovery on this list, we have one that happened while he was in space, of course, but the results of it weren't really discovered until he was back here on Earth. Scott has a twin brother who is called Mark. While Scott was on a year-long mission aboard the International Space Station, Mark was, of course, here on Earth. Once Scott returned from his lengthy mission, him and Mark were both subjected to a 2-year-long study because, of course, since they were twins, it presented an interesting scenario. After the study concluded, NASA confirmed that 7% of Scott's genes were different. So basically, it was discovered that space changes your DNA. That's so wild, and it also makes me really wonder, even more than ever before, what other life forms out there look like then. While some of Scott's DNA expressions will change back to a closer version of what they were prior, it won't ever be 100% the same as it was before. In our number 8 spot today, we have ocean maps. Gordon Cooper had an exceptional life and career as an aerospace engineer, test pilot, United States Air Force pilot, and he was the youngest of the 7 original astronauts in Project Mercury, which was the first human space program of the United States. It truly is astonishing, and the things he was able to accomplish, and one of the things he did, led to a dark discovery right here on Earth. While Gordon was up in space orbiting Earth in 1963, he began to make some maps. This was inspired by these dark spots that he observed in the Caribbean Sea. Later, a friend of Gordon, Daryl Miklos, who was an explorer, took these maps and began searching these locations that Gordon had marked as places of interest. Daryl thought he was going to find an ancient shipwreck, but instead, he found something that continues to stump researchers and Daryl himself. He came across a very strange structure that wasn't like anything that he had seen before. This structure had long obtrusions which stuck out from the sides, and the whole thing was covered in coral, so whatever this thing is, it has been down there for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Daryl has said, quote, there's identical formations in 3 different areas and they don't look nature-made, they don't look man-made, certainly nothing I've ever seen based on my experience, and I have years of experience at doing this. We've identified multiple different types of shipwreck material. This doesn't match or look anything like that. People have started speculating that this structure may just be the remains of a crashed UFO. If it isn't that, what else could it be? I'm feeling pretty open to suggestions. In our number 7 spot today, we have the space snake. Dr. Franklin Story Musgrave is an American physician and retired NASA astronaut, and considering how credible he tends to be, despite the absurdities of this story, it makes it hard to pass off as a lie so easily. While he was in space, he claims that I saw something I don't wish upon anyone, a sort of space snake. He said that he saw an 8-foot-long white snake floating through space. I don't even know what I would do. Probably cry? Call Houston? I'm not sure. There are many people who think that this was simply just a detached hose from the spaceship, but Dr. Musgrave remains adamant on what he saw, and to be completely honest, I believe him. Maybe his mind was playing tricks on him. I mean, I don't know what happens in space, but I find it hard to believe that this person, who would likely be familiar with the parts of the spacecraft, mistook a hose for a snake. Also, how would they not notice an 8-foot-long hose missing? Again, I'm certainly no astronaut, it just seems strange. In our number 6 spot today, we have animals. It is well known that prior to human spaceflight becoming a thing, in order to test out what space would do to a living being, we instead sent a monkey and a dog in our place first in order to study the effects. Morally, it's not the greatest thing we've done. In fact, it's horrible, but this has gone on to have an incredible impact on our ability to research space, and the sacrifices those animals unfortunately unwillingly made has not gone on in vain. This has, however, created quite a grim situation for some astronauts. Many of the animals sent to space were sent there with no plans of survival or even recovery. Yep, that means that there are animal corpses floating through space as I make this video and as you watch it. How terrible! It has been said that unfortunately sometimes the astronauts on space missions have to encounter these grim situations, but I'm sure it makes them all the more grateful for the sacrifice and the terrible things that these animals must have endured. In our number 5 spot today we have this mysterious video. In 1991, the cosmonaut Musa Manarov was on a mission in space when he captured a video that has been raising questions ever since. I'll show the video first, and then we can discuss. Do you have any idea what that is just floating out in the middle of absolute nothingness? Well, neither do I, so we're on the same page. Whatever this shiny cylindrical object is, it has been stumping us for decades since the video was captured. There is even a CIA document that refers to this story and how strange and unexplainable it is. Maybe it's like the snake and it could just be a part of their spacecraft that had come off, but what if it's not? At this point, we may never know for sure. In our number 4 spot today, we have giant moon babies. You'd think I'm kidding, but just wait. Since the moon landing, conspiracy theorists have gone absolutely wild. Of course, we have the popular theory of how the moon landing never actually happened and that it was all shot in a studio. That's probably the most well-known one, but the one I'm about to tell you is perhaps the most terrifying and also my favorite. So this conspiracy mystery suggests that the moon landing was real, which it was. Don't get mad at me. And it starts off in 1969 after Armstrong had successfully landed on the moon. During this monumental Apollo 11 mission, NASA claims to have lost transmission for about 2 minutes, and those 2 minutes are gold for conspiracy theorists. There are people out there who believe that this quote transmission interruption is actually just a cover up for a secret message that Neil was sending back to NASA. It is said that he said, quote, "These babies were huge, sir. Enormous. Oh god, you wouldn't believe it. I'm telling you, there are other spacecrafts out here lined up on the far side of the crater's edge. They're on the moon watching us. I don't know who they are or why their babies are so big, but this is perhaps the most bizarre space conspiracy theory I have ever heard. I mean, I wasn't there, so who am I to say that Neil Armstrong didn't discover giant alien moon babies, you know?" In our number 3 spot today we have the lights. Leroy Chiao was the commander of the ISS in 2005, and this is exactly when this strange sighting occurred. It is said that he wasn't the only one who witnessed this, however, as it is said that the entire crew was there to see this unexplainable occurrence along with him. Basically, it is said that they saw a strange set of lights while up in space. He went on to describe the lights and said that they were in a formation of an upside down V, and that they ended up just stumbling upon this bizarre situation after the formation flew past them. I'm just gonna say it, we're all thinking it, that sounds a lot like aliens. I just don't have any other possible explanations, and you're telling me that the whole crew saw it? I swear, nothing will convince me of aliens more than an astronaut's first-hand account. In our number 2 spot today we have glowing green. Back with another Gordon Cooper story, this time it's about something he witnessed in space and only in space. On May 15th, 1963, he was sent off into space in a Mercury capsule for a 22-orbit journey around the Earth, and while on this journey, he saw something extremely unsettling. A glowing green object that would approach his capsule. During his final orbit, he did tell the tracking station of this object that was quickly approaching his capsule, and they were able to pick up this UFO on their radar, but once Cooper landed, reporters were told that he was not allowed to answer any questions regarding this UFO. It is even more interesting considering how Gordon has been a vocal and firm believer in UFOs even before he was an astronaut. So I ask, what do you guys think this was? In our number 1 spot today we have the knock. Okay, space is a vacuum, right? So it should be silent, right? We've all heard about space roar, the alleged unsettling noise of space, but for the most part it should be relatively silent. That is exactly what makes this story the plot of a horror movie in my opinion. Back in 2003, Yang Liwei became the first astronaut sent into space by the Chinese space program. That's an amazing accomplishment and likely a very exciting adventure, so imagine his surprise when, as he's sitting in his space shuttle, he hears a knock. He described it as, quote, someone knocking the body of the spaceship just as knocking an iron bucket with a wooden hammer. Okay, perhaps we could just chalk this up to some extremely reasonable explanation, but he's not the only one who's heard it. There were other Chinese astronauts between 2005 and 2008 who reported hearing similar sounds, and it's not like you can just open up the door to check. Next thing up, we need Ring doorbells for space shuttles, apparently.
Starting off this countdown, we had the fear of heights. Now you might be like, why would you become an astronaut if you're afraid of heights? Don't ask me, but NASA astronaut Drew Futzel has a fear of heights, but this hasn't impacted any of his missions. In 2018, days before he was sent back into space, NASA released a video revealing 5 facts about the astronaut that people might not know. For one of the facts, he revealed he is afraid of heights. But like I said, this hasn't affected his missions. He has spent a total of 29 days in space and completed 42 hours of spacewalks over the course of 2 missions. That's pretty insane. Whereas other astronauts think that they're fine and they're not afraid of heights until they go to space and they're like, whoa, okay, look at Earth down there, we're really high up. In our 9th spot, we have the damage. Now in part 1 of this video, I talked about mechanical failures. That's something that astronauts fear. Something that they also fear that is kind of along the same lines would be spacecraft failure. Like the craft itself getting damaged and it starts breaking apart. That's what's protecting the astronauts from space. If their craft breaks down, they are pretty much stranded. How are they going to return home without a vessel to travel in? While extensive steps are taken to avoid this, it can still happen at any moment. They could get hit by a meteoroid or by space junk and it could easily bang up the craft and cause unrepairable damage. Or chemical leaks or air leaks. You just never know. And this is what keeps astronauts on their toes. In our 8th spot, we have the return home. I can only imagine how life-changing going to space would be for someone. It could change an astronaut's life forever, but not always in a positive way. After being in space for so long, they are not used to the conditions of Earth. Some astronauts have developed really bad anxiety after returning home. The cause for this is the constant stimulation. In space, it's pretty quiet. When they return home, they need to get used to the noise of crowds and everything constantly going on around them. This often overwhelms them. Others worry about the physical impact space has on their body. Getting used to gravity again apparently makes astronauts feel really sick, and for months they feel woozy and they feel like they're just gonna throw up constantly. Also, when astronauts return home, it throws off their balance, so it's like learning to walk all over again. Honestly, at this point I'm like, where are the pros of going to space? All I see are cons. Moving on to number 7, we have dying. One of the most common fears in the world is the fear of dying. If you stay out of harm's way, you have a less chance of dying. But for astronauts, well, they're being sent into the unknown. Anything could happen at any given time and they could die. I think we all know by now how dangerous their job is. So I mean, it makes sense that astronauts would be fearful of losing their life in space. Moving on to number 6, we have the orbit fire. This is pretty crazy. Fires in space are very real, and a flame in microgravity can be even more dangerous than a fire on Earth. Why? Well, the flame can survive on less oxygen and can burn for a longer period of time. This actually happened in 1997 aboard the Mir space station. On February 24th, 6 crew members were in serious danger when a fire ignited aboard the craft. According to one of the astronauts aboard the craft, he said, and I quote, "The fire was so enormous and the smoke and vapor coming off this fire site was such that we couldn't see at arm's length, and I could not at that time have imagined that we go on with the mission." Now they did end up putting out the fire, but what made this so dangerous is that it took a while before the fire was even detected. That's because on Earth hot air rises, so the smoke detectors pick up on the smoke and then the alarm sounds. In space, the smoke doesn't flow like that, it will just follow the flow of the ventilation systems, meaning it will take a while before the smoke detectors do pick up on it. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with getting trapped. Imagine being miles and miles away from home with no way to get back. This is another thing that astronauts fear. They get sent into space and it ends up being a one-way ticket. Whether that be their craft malfunctions and there's no way to fix it, or from losing permanent contact with ground control, who knows? But if they do get trapped in space, they're kind of SOL, just floating around for days until they run out of food, supplies, or oxygen, or all of the above. In our fourth spot, we have the oxygen. At any time, a spacecraft could lose air pressure and oxygen and then become a death trap for the astronauts. There's just tons of things that could go wrong with the oxygen in space. Like for the Apollo 13 mission, the crew experienced a blown oxygen tank and the other was leaking very fast. Thankfully, they were able to stop the leaks and had enough breathable air to still make it home. But still, it could have ended much worse. Now, what would happen in the worst case scenario if they lose air pressure and oxygen? Well, the astronauts wouldn't die instantly. They would black out in about 15 seconds because in that amount of time, deoxygenated blood will have arrived to their brain. With no oxygen, the brain shuts down pretty dang fast. Also, low pressures will force the gas exchange in their body to start reversing itself. So the oxygen will be pulled out of your body and thrown into the lungs, where it's released out of the body. If you try holding your breath, your lungs will probably rupture. Then you'll experience hypoxia, your skin will turn blue, you'll lose vision and convulse, among other nasty things like having your body just swell up. So yeah, I can see why that scares astronauts, yeah. In our third spot, we have the ammonia leak. This is apparently what NASA trainers tell astronauts. They say, and I quote, "If you smell ammonia, don't worry about running the procedure because you're gonna die anyway." How great is that? How reassuring. So liquid ammonia is used to keep the station's electricity generating solar panels cool. However, ammonia is highly toxic. In March of 2021, 2 astronauts doing a spacewalk outside of the International Space Station had to be checked for ammonia contamination. The 2 were outside fixing the cooling system when frozen flakes of ammonia were released. The astronauts had to have their suits inspected for ammonia crystals before returning to the station. If it's brought inside, well, it's hella corrosive and also a huge irritant to one's eyes and lungs. In our second spot, we have the suit problems. Probably the worst time for an astronaut's suit to malfunction would be when they're out on a spacewalk. This happened in 2001 with Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield. He was out on a spacewalk when his left eye suddenly started to sting and fill with tears. Well, the tears ended up forming a blob of fluid that covered his right eye. So he's got his left eye stinging and tearing up, and we got his right eye obstructed by the tears. So he was left blinded while out in space. Now, Chris was worried that maybe his eye was stinging because of a toxic gas leak in the suit. So ground control told him to release all the air in his suit to get rid of the potential contaminant. So this guy's in space, he can't see, and now he's told to get rid of all breathable air. I would be like, hell no, I'm not doing that. But Chris did as he was told, and that did the trick. Turns out, thankfully, the thing that irritated his eyes was the anti-fogging agent that was applied to the inside of his visor. So it was nothing deadly. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the drowning. Now, you might be thinking, Lindsay, how does one drown in space? Well, it's actually much scarier than you actually realize. And this happened on July 16th, 2013 to ECA astronaut Luca Parmitano during his spacewalk. So Luca was out on his spacewalk when he felt water on the back of his neck. Turns out that some contamination blocked a fan pump in his suit, which caused the water to back up and start filling his helmet with coolant water. Soon enough, the water in Luca's suit was blocking his vision. He had no way to clear his eyes, nose, or mouth. Thankfully, he was able to make it back to the space station just in time before he drowned. Starting off this countdown, we have the fear of the unknown. During an interview with astronaut Chris Hadfield, he said that the thing he feared the most about going into space was the fear of the unknown, because anything can go wrong at any time. Plus, no matter how much you prepare, there's no way you can prepare for everything that could go wrong, because you don't know everything that can go wrong. Plus, astronauts are miles away from home with limited supplies and contact. They're pretty much on their own to save themselves if anything does go wrong. So it's the fear of not knowing what's to come that terrifies them. In our 9th spot, we have space junk. Obviously, space is filled with floating space objects, but also tons of man-made junk, like debris from old satellites, rocket ship pieces, lost equipment, you name it. It said that there are 28 million pieces of space debris floating around up there. That's about 6,000 tons of space debris. On top of that, each piece flies around at 18,000 miles per hour. At any second, debris could crash into the astronauts' spacecraft and wipe them out. In fact, it said that even tiny paint flecks can damage a spacecraft when traveling at these velocities. Imagine what anything larger could do. So space junk is certainly something astronauts fear. I mean, I wouldn't be able to sleep. I would be way too paranoid. In our 8th spot, we have loss of communication. When astronauts are in space, they rely on ground control to help them out. Ground control plays a critical part in the space mission success. They make sure that everything goes as planned and that the craft stays on course. So imagine how frightening it would be to all of a sudden lose contact with them. Astronauts are then left alone just floating through space. They then would have to manually fly their spacecraft home. Astronauts have lost connection a couple of times, but it's only been for a couple of hours. Moving on to number 7, we have the toxic atmosphere. According to NASA astronaut Drew Morgan, he is worried about space's toxic atmosphere. He admitted to this on social media when responding to a comment that read, "What is the biggest and most terrifying thing astronauts fear about being in space?" There are a number of things in space that make it so deadly for astronauts. For starters, exposure to space can cause embolism, hypoxia, and hypocapnia. Not only that, but astronauts can get sick from being on the moon. When the Apollo astronauts returned from the moon, they got sick off of the moon dust on their spacesuits. It made their throats sore and eyes water. The particles are so fine, but sharp like glass. In fact, it said that, and I quote, "Particles 50 times smaller than a human hair can hang around for months inside your lungs. The longer the particle stays, the greater the chance for toxic effects." But there are so many other things in space that can have a negative impact on the astronauts, like exposure to UV rays and radiation, which can cause cell mutation. Also, there's no pressure in space. The lower the pressure, the lower a liquid's boiling point is. But since in space there is no pressure, the boiling point can easily drop to an astronaut's body temperature, meaning their blood and other liquids in their body would start to boil. Not a pleasant way to go, that's for sure. In our 6th spot, we have the depressurization. Astronaut Drew Morgan claims that astronauts are also scared of depressurization. He said, and I quote, "There's always the possibility that we could depressurize or that a hole could be punctured by a micrometeoroid or something and we could leak our atmosphere overboard." So let's say that an astronaut was exposed directly to the vacuum of space. Since space doesn't have atmospheric pressure, the astronauts' lungs will expand and burst. After that, the water in their soft tissues will vaporize, causing their whole body to swell up. Then bubbles would form in the veins, blocking blood flow, and the astronauts' bowels, bladder, and stomach will explode, expelling their contents. But don't worry, the astronaut would die from loss of oxygen first before all of that happens. Still, it's terrifying to think of. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with getting sick. In space, there's no hospitals, there's no nurses, there's no doctors. So if you get sick or injured, you're on your own. You need to rely on your crew members to help you out. This is another fear for astronauts, getting sick while in space or seeing their crew get sick while in space. Also, if one person gets sick somehow, chances are others will too. Space is a pretty germy environment. When a person sneezes on Earth, the snot particles shoot out about 3 to 6 feet and then gravity knocks them out of the air into the floor. But in space, there's no gravity, so if an astronaut sneezes or coughs, it's lingering in the air for their companions to breathe in and enjoy. As a result, sickness or diseases can spread really fast. Another fear they have is dying in orbit, because A, that would suck, and B, what are the crew members supposed to do with the astronaut's dead body? They'll be stuck living beside it for days until they return home. Has to be traumatizing. Moving on to number 4, we have the mechanical failures. This is another fear that Chris Hadfield brought up that's common among astronauts, and that's fear that they will experience some sort of mechanical failure or defect, whether that be during liftoff, while in orbit, docking, or re-entry. I mean, there have been a number of disasters already, like the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster. In 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger broke apart 73 seconds into the flight. As a result, the shuttle broke down over the Atlantic Ocean and all 7 crew members on board lost their lives. This was due to a failure of the O-ring seal in the right solid rocket booster. In space, If their spacecraft fails or if their systems malfunction, they're pretty much screwed, so no one can come out there to save them. Moving on, number 3, we have floating off into space. Although it's never happened to any astronauts so far, it's a very real fear that astronauts have. And hey, I don't blame them. Anyways, if astronauts spacewalk, they have to tether themselves down. If those tethers fail, oh boy, they're drifting out into space. No matter how much they kick or flail their arms, it won't bring them back to the shuttle. Now NASA does have these emergency jetpack things that can help fly them back to safety, but if the fuel runs out, they're in trouble. They'll be floating around for 7.5 hours until their breathable air runs out, or until they get hit by space junk and die, or the space junk could cause a hole in their helmet or suit, and then we know what would happen, okay? So yeah, I can see why astronauts are afraid of getting separated from the spacecraft and floating away. Moving on to number 2, we have the re-entry. So let's say everything goes fine. Takeoff was a success, the crew survived orbiting space and landing on the moon. Now the only thing they have left to do is come back home. You'd think that they would be excited, you know, to be back home, eating normal food and, you know, being where gravity is. Turns out returning home is something that they fear, and that's because they could burn up or get destroyed upon re-entry. This happened in 2003 with the Columbia Space Shuttle. Upon re-entering Earth's atmosphere, the shuttle started to disintegrate. Sadly, all 7 crew members on board lost their lives. And now if they do manage to survive re-entry, they gotta worry about landing safely instead of just crashing down full speed into the ground. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the catastrophe. Honestly, I never even thought about this, but according to Chris Hadfield, some astronauts are afraid of a huge catastrophe occurring on Earth while they're off the planet. Now you might think, hey, that's good, at least you weren't on the planet to witness it, but hello, that means that Earth is now in ruins and their loved ones are dead. Who's gonna be alive and at NASA helping them navigate back home? Chances are, nobody, so they would be stuck in space, just orbiting around until they run out of supplies. And even if they did somehow re-enter Earth successfully, they're coming back home to nothing. And that's a pretty dark thing to think about.